Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the human adventure, all through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, your producer and co-host. Man, have we got a show for you today. Number one, best-selling author, speaker, and clinical director, certified level 3 IFS therapist, that's internal family systems, IFS clinical consultant, certified sex addiction therapist supervisor. Her bio goes on and on and on. She has a previous book titled Altogether You, her brand new book, Altogether Us. And of course, I am talking about Jenna Riemersma. You are going to want to hear this episode. We go into internal family systems and the Enneagram and how they can relate to each other, how they can serve each other. Jenna is an Enneagram 1, Wing 2, and this episode is chock full. I'm telling you, it is chock full. You're going to be taking notes. You're going to be listening to it again and again. So glad she's here with us and glad you are here with us. Hey, that's it for me, Anthony Skinner, and let's get on with the man of the hour, Ian Crum.
Hello, Typology friends. Welcome back to the podcast on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and really the whole of the human adventure through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm so stoked today. Now, you all know that I've spoken numerous times about how much I really appreciate internal family systems work as a psychological framework and modality for understanding our inner architecture, what our inner worlds are like, and how we can begin to better practice self-governance, self-compassion, self-leadership, all the things that really matter to us that help us move through the world with less friction and more emotional wisdom. And today, we are joined by Jenna Riemersma, who is the author of a book I absolutely cannot recommend to you more strongly. It's Altogether You, Experiencing Personal and Spiritual Transformation with Internal Family Systems Therapy. Jenna's work is really, really great. It's theologically sophisticated, it's thoughtful, it's funny, it's informative. It's all this stuff. And I'm hard to please. I will tell you, you all know that. I am a very hard to please person. As a writer, I am the first one to spot the problem. And I really, Jenna, welcome to the show. I'm so stoked for our conversation today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's just begin. We've had, as you mentioned, your friend Allison Cook on, but I want to hear from you a précis of what internal family systems is, with the assumption that the listener really doesn't know anything about it yet.
Sure. Well, internal family systems is an incredibly popular newish model of therapy, a way of understanding ourselves as human beings and how we heal most effectively, that is deeply compassionate. And it's based on the premise that we all kind of get, which is that there are many different parts of ourselves. There's one part of me that wants to eat all the Oreos in the house in one sitting. And there's another part of me that would like to fit into my jeans. And those two parts of me are at war. And that warring creates suffering inside of me. And IFS helps us to understand that that's a normal state of being human. And when we understand that and embrace the different parts of ourselves, we can actually begin to heal in some very counterintuitive ways.
Right. So in this psychotherapeutic framework, we no longer are operating under the assumption that we have a single personality, right, but we really are a collection of personalities. Now, someone might be thinking, a non-clinician would be thinking, that actually sounds kind of scary. Like, in other words, that feels kind of scary to me. So can you unpack that a little bit more?
I'd love to. I think when we think about it in through the lens of what many people would consider what used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's now
Mm-hmm.
DID. It feels really scary and frightening, but most people can really relate to the experience of feeling one way in one moment and then immediately being hijacked by another part of themselves and feeling completely differently in the next moment. And this is just a way of understanding why that happens and how we can welcome and help to heal even the hardest parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I think what might help folks is to just talk about these different categories of parts, because I think the more we do that, the more the lights are going to go on, right? So we have a category known as exiles. Why don't you explore those for me for a moment?
The exiles are really what drive everything in our systems. And the exiles are the parts of us. They have originally positive qualities because IFS helps us to understand that all parts of ourselves are positive, have a positive essence. But what happens is when difficult things occur or we experience trauma, these parts of us get covered over or become burdened, to use IFS language, with their trauma burden. And so, for example, a playful part that's very young and spontaneous might be shamed for being messy or something of that nature and get covered over with the burden of shame. So we no longer have access to our playfulness. Now, every time a similar situation occurs, we just get shame that gets triggered and takes us over. And the exile parts of us are all the parts that carry those vulnerable burdens, things like shame, fear, being alone, being unwanted, feeling broken, feeling powerless. And those exiles are called exiles because everything inside of us tries to exile them. But when they burst forward and take over our systems, it's like a 5-alarm fire, and other parts of us become activated and get burdened trying to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, one of the things, and this is, God, we're going to go into some things because there's a lot of theological stuff going on in here too, right?
Yes.
So when we think about the next category, when we're talking about managers, protectors, unpack those for us, because but let me say this before you do. One of the things I love about internal family systems is this idea that there are no bad parts, only good parts stuck in bad roles.
That's right.
And let me just say that again, because I just want people to hear this, right? There are no bad parts, only good parts stuck in bad roles.
That's right.
All right, let's talk about managers. Now we know about exiles. Talk to us about managers.
That's right. Well, when our exiles get covered over with these burdens that create these incredibly painful feelings, we get two categories of parts that are called protector parts that try to protect us from the pain of the exiles. The managers try to do it proactively by preventing us from being in situations where the exiles would be triggered. And the firefighters do it reactively. When the exiles get triggered, the firefighters try to run in and put out the flames of the exiles. So the manager parts are things like perfectionism, people-pleasing, control, spiritualizing, which is distinct from our authentic spiritual experience, which is held at our core. We can talk more about that. And our firefighters are all the things that come into my office and clinicians' offices. These are things like sex addiction, alcoholism, cutting, dissociating, suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation. And the interesting thing about our internal experience is that it is a system. So our managers try to prevent the exiles. Eventually that fails. The exiles flood. The firefighters jump in, and round we go. And it tends to be a cycle that increases. So the more we try not to eat the Oreos, the more Oreos we eat. And what the system, when these burdened parts are triggered, what's missing is the core, what IFS refers to as our self or our authentic self. And in my book, Altogether You, I kind of translate internal family systems for Christians, for people of faith, and just help us to understand that really what that means is it's the image of God inside of all of us. And by virtue of the fact that it's the very nature of God, it cannot be bad. It cannot be broken. So we have this image of God at our core that is designed to be the leader of our internal system. And we have all of these good parts that have naturally positive qualities that bring their essence to our unique personalities. But when difficult things happen, our parts become burdened and they get triggered and they obscure our access to the God image inside of us, much like the clouds covering the sun. The sun is still there when the clouds cover it, but we can't see it. And when our burdened parts get triggered, they take us over and we no longer have access to the image of God inside of us, even though it's still there. And that, I think, is one of the most powerful pieces of this message, is that God is in here, not over there on the other side of this big old pile of sin that we have going on, but right here inside of us. And that the answer to helping these burdened parts to heal is actually to welcome them from that image of God that is always compassionate, curious, and connected, and to hear why and how they are in so much pain, burdened with these difficult feelings and behaviors, and help them to unburden, to restore them to their original positive essence. It's really an attachment-based way of healing.
I love this. So I love this, and I hope maybe we'll get around to writing a book about what you call, some call spirit-led self, some people call it essential self. That's what I like to call it, essential self.
Yes.
Some authentic self. As I was reading your book and others, I just kept thinking about Thomas Merton and his notion of the hidden wholeness. It's that part of us that has never been traumatized, has never been, could get me into trouble, right? It is that part of us actually that is unmarred by sin. Now that is for a lot of people, that is a non-starter, right? Yes. But I've encouraged people to read your book, and I could name some others, but this has always been my premise, honestly. I've never been able to completely square the math on Reformed theology. I cannot quite get the math to work out, right? A lot of beautiful parts to it, and then other parts I go, really? No, I can't. My intuition and my own life experience just can't get on board with it, right? Now and so I'm hoping someone actually writes a book on the essential self, because I think it's one of the most interesting parts of the internal family systems model. And that, according to Schwartz, right, and I'm sure you could add some other things onto it. How do we know when we're in the authentic self, or like we're operating from that place? We are compassionate, right? Curious, calm, confident, courageous, creative, clear. Have I got all those? I can't remember if I have them all, but these are signposts that we are living or operating from an unobscured self. Does that make sense? And so we've gotten rid of the bifurcation between true self and false self.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes.
I love that.
Well, I do as well. And I think you're really making two very important points here. The first is many people of faith, when they hear that the image of God is inside of you and it is fundamentally good, it is undamaged, they immediately come back with the question, which is understandable. Well, what about the fundamental depravity of man? What about, original sin? Like, there's a lot of concern about that. And I talk about that quite a bit in my book. I think it's really important. And IFS gives us a way of understanding that it is not the God image inside of us that is marred by sin. Definitionally, that's not possible. It is our parts that hold the burdens of sin, or the burden of trauma, as we would say in the clinical world. The original Greek speaks to, as many of us know, missing the mark, hamartia, which means things are not the way they're supposed to be. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. And when the world isn't how it's supposed to be and it misses the mark, our parts become burdened, and now they carry the burden of trauma or sin. And we are never fully unburdened this side of heaven. And so we will always carry that fundamental depravity or original sin, but it isn't carried by the God image inside of us. It's carried by our parts. And that's a really key distinction. It opens up this beautiful, compassionate model for people of faith who want to understand how this can jibe with Reformed or Christian theology. Yes.
And yet, And yet, I think that for many people of faith, this is an absolute game changer.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Well, first of all, the mystics forever
Yes.
have been talking about this idea that God is not at a distance, that actually we already have union with God.
Sure.
The problem is realizing it, right? Like it's right. So God within, right? The kingdom of God within.
Right.
Also, I think this idea that there is a splinter of the divine, there is a particle of God inside of us. Or I guess as Merton and later Rohr talks about, that immortal diamond, that the center of the person, right?
That's right.
So I taught some internal family systems work to a small group of men over a weekend not long ago. And when I got to that part, one guy in particular leaned in and he's like, you just changed 30 years of my thinking about anthropology, about human beings. And like in a moment. So I hope people don't skip over that. In fact, might want to go back and re-listen to this one little section we've been talking about, the essential self, which is, unfortunately gets blended with other parts, and we get confused and over-identify who we are with those other parts, and forget all about this essential self, right?
Exactly. And as you said, when we are connected to that essential self or to the image of God, we will spontaneously have the experience of those 8C qualities that you mentioned: calm, curious, connected, compassionate, which is exactly the description that I understood about the fruit of the Spirit and remaining in the vine. And when we are in the vine, the fruit of the Spirit just kind of poofs on out of us. And I never quite understood that scripture before IFS, because I thought, it may just poof on out of other people, but it's not poofing on out of me. I have manager parts that are working really hard and efforting to exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. But the truth is that the way that we get there, there's not efforting. It is a spontaneous eruption of a natural state of being. And the way that we get there is actually by welcoming the parts of us that are triggered and are obscuring the access to that. And I've developed a 3-word shorthand of the model to help us do that, so anyone can do it at any point, to help us gain access to the God image within us, because the God image inside of us, this authentic self, is compassionate and connected and curious with every part of who we are, no matter what it is stuck feeling or doing. So that means not just the perfectionist parts and the people-pleasing parts, but also the parts that are thinking about suicide, and also the parts that are profoundly depressed or anxious, and the parts that are struggling with OCD, and the parts that are addicted. The God image, just like Jesus did when he was on earth, moves toward all parts of us with curiosity and compassion. The Pharisees moved against the lepers, the prostitutes, the storms. Jesus moved toward, and that's why I call my shorthand of the model move toward, because it helps us move toward the parts of ourselves that are the hardest to embrace, connect to the image of God inside of us, and experience that overflowing poof of the fruit of the Spirit that sometimes can seem so elusive.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Every January brings us a new opportunity to start a new chapter. Life isn't about resolutions that fade by February. It's about picking up the pen and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as your editorial partner, helping you write new chapters and create the meaningful life you deserve. So whether you're already striving toward a specific goal or you're struggling to set healthy boundaries, BetterHelp therapists are trained to empower you to become the best version of yourself. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving over 5 million people worldwide. And with their diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties, you are sure to find one that works for you. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. So don't wait. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/typology podcast today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/typology podcast. Yeah, I love this. Okay, so it's so interesting. I have a sponsee in my 12-step community, and he's been in recovery for quite some time from alcohol and drug abuse, addiction.
Yes.
And the other day he said to me, I am so anxious. And I said, not true. I mean, we're good friends, so it's not like, but it's not like a clinical relationship.
Yeah.
I said, actually, just a part of you is anxious, but you, and then I went on to describe this essential self for him.
Right.
Just a part of you is anxious. Now, that part of you is so anxious right now. It has blended itself all up inside of your, with your essential spirit-led self. And now you're kind of confused about who you are. But I just want you to know you are not anxious. A part of you is, but not the whole of you. And again, it's like this little light went on in his eyes like, oh, that really helps. Like there is a strong, beautiful core there that is not anxious. It's just not anxious.
Well, and I think you've made a really important point here. And there's a fascinating reality that IFS has discovered, which is the firefighter team works in a hierarchy, which means that we all have multiple firefighters. And if we enter into addiction recovery, addiction is my clinical specialization. So let's say that someone is struggling with alcohol and they're over-consuming alcohol and they decide to get into recovery. And the only thing that they do is try to take the firefighter that's drinking and lock him in the basement.
Yes.
Then what's going to happen? We haven't addressed the rest of the system. We haven't addressed the anxiety. We haven't addressed the inner critic, which is the manager. We haven't addressed the overworking. We haven't addressed the perfectionism that the drinking firefighter was
those are all
tending
parts.
to. Those are all parts.
Those are all just parts, right?
So what's going to happen, and you see this all the time in 12-step groups or in recovery groups, is you have to walk through a cloud of smoke to get into the recovery meeting. Then you stand in a long line to get your coffee and caffeine, and then you sit down next to your buddies in recovery who are sober and have all gained 20 pounds. And the reason is because if we simply try to lock away one of the firefighters and we don't address the system that is driving it, the other firefighters will be recruited and will escalate. So we're going to eat, we're going to overeat, we're going to smoke, we're going to caffeinate, we're going to try to address the anxiety in this example with other firefighters and other managers. And we can create an escalating situation. So this is why we say in addiction recovery and sobriety are not the same thing. Sober means one of the firefighters is stopping its behavior. Recovery means we've tended to the entire system and we have unburdened parts through some means. Maybe it's through EMDR, maybe it's through IFS, maybe it's through showing up in real and authentic ways with our folks in our recovery groups and letting ourselves be seen and not rejected and not condemned. And that is in itself a profoundly healing experience. But if we treat it as C. Sykes, who's a fabulous IFS lead trainer, as she would say, if we just look at the symptom and don't attend to the system, we've missed the boat.
So let me push back a little bit because I've been in 12-step programs a long time. And I think I understand what you're saying. It's slightly mischaracterized in my experience, like within the alcohol, at least I don't know about OA. I don't know about lots of other recovery communities. I'm just talking about what I know of,
Sure.
The ones that I attend. So I don't think we would use the word sobriety that way. What you're describing is abstinence.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So because sobriety actually in the mind of a person in recovery has a very rich spiritual component.
Yeah.
And of course, Bill W.'s teaching around emotional sobriety, which presumes that a person, to quote the big book, has done the work of examining and working out the underlying causes and conditions of the addiction. So that is really built into the DNA of of 12-step work. And what they don't have necessarily is the vernacular of IFS, which would be terrifically helpful.
Yeah.
So like, I know many people that you're describing, not a ton. Most people I know in the 12-step world are doing a lot of good work. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes.
finding help in lots of other modalities, maybe in IFS as well, to get at the underlying causes so that they don't cross into other addictive behaviors, or to use your language, they don't activate new firefighters, you know? So that everyone knows, because I don't want to assume everyone knows. So an addiction is a kind of firefighter, right? So I know in my own personal experience, I was in a lot of pain, right? I grew up in a terrible alcoholic and drug addicted home. I carried a lot of trauma. So that's part of the equation. I mean, I think addictions are so ding dang complicated beyond, you know.
They are.
But so trauma is a piece of it. And it reached a point where the only way that I could quiet that exile, that wounded child, right, was to start drinking and using drugs. It's like that's, and so there's a good part employing a misguided strategy for coping with trauma. Now that's a whole different way of understanding yourself in recovery. And that's what I do like, because what I don't like to hear in recovery meetings is when someone goes, there's this part of me that hates me and wants to kill me. And I'm like, actually, no, that's not true. There's a part of you that just wants to take away the pain. And it's just misguided. And just doesn't know any other way except to, turn on the hose full blast and burn your life to the ground.
That's right.
It's so maybe to say that all parts are well intended. Like that alcoholic inside of me had good intentions. It wasn't like just like party boy, although there was that. It was just basically like, I don't know any other way to stop the pain.
That's right. That's right. And that is a really beautiful observation. So if you think about, again, C. Sykes kind of conceptualizes these burden parts on a triangle. If the triangle has the single point on the bottom, the exiles are on the bottom, the managers are on the top left, and the firefighters are on the top right, and the authentic self is in the middle. And if you think about all of the managers, they are all burdened. They're stuck in unhelpful roles, trying their best to help us to be successful in a forward-facing way so that we don't get rejected, so that we don't miss deadlines, so that we do it right, so that we please God. They're kind of trying to help us in that way. The firefighters are much less obviously well-intentioned because the behaviors that they're burdened with are behaviors that are often quite impactful and damaging, and they're behaviors that are widely vilified. Alcoholism, suicidality, homicidality. And people will say, what do you mean these are positively intentioned parts? But every single one of those reactive firefighters, they are reacting to the pain of the exiles. When the exiles get triggered and we're overwhelmed with shame, powerlessness, chaos, fear, the firefighters come in and their job, their positive intention is to soothe, to numb pain, to get us some type of nurture, some type of connection, some type of excitement. And they do it in unhelpful ways, but their positive intent is underneath that. And it's important to say that all parts welcome doesn't mean all behaviors welcome. So IFS is not saying, oh, this is great. These are actually good parts. So let's welcome all the drinking and all the suicidality and all the drug addiction. And IFS is saying that the key to healing these parts from an IFS standpoint is to actually welcome them, witness them from the God image, and unburden them. And of course, as you say, addiction is a very complex situation. We also have neurobiology, we have habit. There are so many other pieces to this puzzle, but the unburdening and the witnessing, actually very much like EMDR is reorienting our neural networks, is kind of connecting some of what's happening in the brain that holds that trauma. And so all parts welcome doesn't mean all behaviors welcome. What it means is that we are most likely to heal through connection, relationship, and love, and not through shame and judgment and hiding.
Okay, this is so wonderful. So let's talk about the Enneagram for a second.
Yeah.
So I love both. Can they play together?
100%. Yes.
Let's talk about that.
I love it. So in my second book, we've got a whole chapter dedicated to the integration of IFS and the Enneagram, and written by Tammy Sollenberger and Joan Ryan, who are experts. And what's beautiful about it is that by knowing IFS, we can get to our Enneagram number. And by knowing our Enneagram number, we can understand our IFS, our internal system. So I'm a 1, wing 2, which, by the way, thank you very much for renaming ones, because I didn't like perfectionist, but I really like improver, and I really still want to be a 7. I just would love to be a 7. I think 7s have all the fun, but I'm a 1, wing 2. And so what you instantly know about me is that I have a certain grouping of parts, and that I have some manager parts that want to do it right, and that are detail oriented and focused on completing tasks correctly, seeing where there are gaps, staying organized. And you also know that I probably have an exile that feels like I'm doing it wrong. I'm not enough. There's shame there. We don't know quite as much about the firefighters that respond to that, but we have a sense of kind of some of my key players. So a 2 on the Enneagram, that's my wing. A 2 is going to have manager parts that want to help other people, that have an outward focus of caretaking, energetically picking up on other people's, needs and what they need, and focusing on that. And there's going to be an exile of I'm not needed. So the only way I can feel needed is for my manager to come in and take care of you, and then you're going to need me and like me and think I'm great. So you know a little bit about my cluster there. Let's take an 8 on the Enneagram. My husband is an 8, a very unburdened 8, I will say. But 8s are going to have sometimes some strong firefighters, and they're very strident. And when they're in an unburdened state, they've got parts that are moving forward to really advocate for people, for those who can't advocate for themselves, as I understand 8. You tell me if I'm getting these numbers correct, if I'm hitting it. And there's going to be some exiles there that are holding some burdens around powerlessness. So in other words, we can understand the internal constellation of our own unique inner systems. At some level, we all have unique systems. So even though I'm a 1, there are parts of me and aspects of my personality that are different from other 1s. But we have some main players that are going to be clear, because their presenting behaviors are the things that cause us to fall into that category in the Enneagram. So it's really a lovely synergy between these two models, helping us to understand why we are the way we are. And the beautiful thing is, from an IFS perspective, we all have attributes. And tell me how this lands with how you're the Enneagram expert, and I am definitely not. But the idea being that we all have attributes of all of the Enneagram types. We have dominant and wings. But as we become more unburdened, we have more fluidity in our self energy and more access to draw from some of the other what you might call, I don't like the word healthy, but unburdened type qualities. So if I'm a 1 and I'm more unburdened, I may be able to pull over into my 8-ness if there is something that needs to be advocated for justice. For example, I can pull in some of that 8, even though I'm not an 8. So yeah, some really beautiful synergy between the models, I think.
Yes. In fact, one of the things, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I used to say, when people said to me, what number is Jesus? They would always ask me that question. For a long
Yeah.
time, the two questions I always got were, what number is Donald Trump and what number is Jesus? Those were like for every workshop I did, I was like, I'm not going to answer that question.
That's
But I
right.
will answer this about Jesus. I'd say, look, if you look at the Enneagram diagram, there is a big white field in the middle, and Jesus is in there.
That's right.
So there's actually, Jesus has access. And if you think of that, about that as a spiritual formation model, like to let go of your addiction and paralytic grip, arthritic grip on your type, to be able to let go of all of its crazy behaviors and migrate into that center field. That is a model of moving toward Christ-likeness. And then you have access, equal access, to all of the gifts that of the 9 types that surround you there in the middle field.
I love that.
And
I'm sorry.
what's that, Anthony?
Well, I just love that you've said that before, and I always think about it makes sense why Jesus was such a mystery to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Because you couldn't define him by personality. You couldn't say, well, if we do this, he'll do this. That's why the Pharisees were always baffled by his response, because it was never what they expected or what they were trying to tee up.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about being an Enneagram 1. When you do your own personal work, as you're doing work with yourself through the lens of an Enneagram 1, can you give a 1 an example of how they can begin to start doing parts work themselves?
Sure. Yeah. So we ones usually want to do it right. I know that's a driving force inside of me. Whatever the aspirational goal is, I want to hit that. I want to do it right. I want to do it perfectly. And so one of the ways that we can start our work, and if you'd like, I can kind of guide us through an experiential.
Let's do it.
If
I'd
you'd like
love
to.
that. I love it.
Because this is effective for all types. This is a way, like I said, this is just a 3-word shorthand that I've developed called Move Toward. It's a shorthand of the model, just a tool to help us welcome our parts from the God image. And we can do that no matter what number we are. So we can think about in our number, what's our dominant orientation? So if we're a 1, do it right. If we're a 2, help others. If we're a 3, achieve, whatever it might be in your particular number. And so the 3 words of the shorthand are notice, know, and need. So I'll just guide us through a little experiential. If you want to think about your number, think about the part of you that gets activated when you are most in that number. So the part of you that wants to do it right, to help, to achieve, whatever it might be. And take a moment to just notice, that's the first word, just notice, how do you know when that part of you is active? Where do you notice it in or around your body? What thoughts do you notice? What feelings do you notice? What impulses do you notice? And just take a moment to really connect in with what it's like to notice that part of you. And if it feels comfortable for you, maybe even offer this part of you a little gentle welcome. And there may be other parts of you that don't like it, and that's okay. You can just let them know that we're not going to invite it to take over. We just want to get to know this part of you a little bit and to see if we might be able to offer it some comfort and compassion. And you can just see, how does your heart feel toward this part of you? Do you feel curious about it, compassionate for how hard it's working? If you feel any sense of open-heartedness or curious compassionateness toward it, just send a little bit of that to this part of you. And you might even get an image of this part of you in your mind's eye or a sense of it in your body. There's no right or wrong. And when you've had a chance to really notice this part of you and get a little bit of open-heartedness toward it, then just ask this part of you, what do you want me to know about you? That's the second step, know. What do you want me to know about you? And don't try to figure it out. Just ask the question and see if anything comes to mind. What do you want me to know about you? And just as if you were meeting a new friend for the first time, you may want to ask it some getting to know you questions. You can ask this part of you, how are you trying to help me? And what are you afraid would happen if you didn't help me in this way? And how long have you been trying to help me like this? When did you first learn that you had to do this to try to take care of me? You might get an image or a memory come up in your mind's eye of an earlier time. And if you do, that's just our part's way of letting us know how they first started doing their jobs. And if not, that's fine as well. And you can even ask this part, how do you like this job? Are there some advantages? Are there some disadvantages? And when you feel like you've understood as much as this part wants you to know right now, if it has communicated with you, then you can move to step 3, which is need. And just ask this part, what do you need from me right now to feel a little more comforted, a little less activated in my life? And you may get a sense of something this part needs internally, like it needs to sit down and take a break, or it might need a hug or a nap. Or maybe there's something in your external world that this part needs, like it needs you to set a boundary or ask for help. So just notice if you get a sense of anything that this part needs from you. And notice how it's doing now that it's had a little time with you. And then whenever it feels ready, just bringing your attention back out to your external environment. And if you did get a sense of anything from this part of you, you can always take just a moment and jot that down. Yeah.
So good. Hey folks, it's official. My new book, The Fix, is finally available. If you pre-ordered already, thanks a lot. But if you haven't, you can pick up a copy anywhere fine books are sold, such as Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, Audible, and of course, if you live here in Nashville, Parnassus Books. I'd love to know what you think about The Fix, so please drop me a note on socials at Ian Morgan Cron or at Typology Podcast. So I'm a 4. Mm-hmm. I'm a self-pres 4, which is a little bit more like has a lot of 3 and 7 energy. Mm. As a 4, here's just my initial take on this. As I was noticing, right, there's a part, shame, 2s, 3s, and 4s wrestle with sadness and shame.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is this part of me that we'll just call him Sam. Sam is where it holds all my shame. Mm. Okay. And where I feel it in my body is usually in my throat.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's in my throat. I think there are some reasons for that, but which I will not bore you with now, but in my throat. And when I asked, so I'm noticing, I know what the body sensation of shame is like. Then to know, moving into that second stage, when I asked that part, what do you want me to know? Basically, immediately, I'm lonely and I feel scared all the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then when I got to what do you need from me right now? Mm-hmm. What I heard was, I need you to take more purposeful action. meaning you're stuck in some places and you're resisting taking action is actually making me more anxious.
Yeah.
Right. Like inactivity can just, if you're just stuck in worry. Right. And I heard that part of me say, I need you to start asking for help more.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing that with you, but also with our listeners for them to say, oh, okay, so now I'm starting to see how this might work for me. And I love this because, I mean, although you could have dedicated time in the morning and have it be very focused, you could do this sitting in the car line, just take a 3-minute check-in, right?
That's right. Yeah. If we're noticing that we're overtaken by a feeling or the behavior, we know immediately we're not in the God image because we're not feeling calm, connected, and curious. And so we can just take a moment and notice, what am I feeling? What's going on in my body? Oh, I have, tight shoulders in my jaw, or I'm gritting my teeth. Great. Let's see if we can welcome that. So tight shoulders and gritting my teeth. What do you want me to know? Well, I'm afraid. This is a scary thing coming up. Great. What do you need from me so that you can feel a little less activated? Well, I need you to ask for help. I need you to set a boundary, whatever it might be. We can do that in a short period of time. And of course, that's not the whole IFS model whatsoever, but it gives us just a bite-sized tool that we can use. And if people are interested to know more about that, that's the second chapter. I kind of expanded on that, and also how it helps us with boundaries. And having boundaries when other people are not safe, when other people have parts that are dangerous or unsafe or that override, our personal initiative. And so that's the second chapter of my second book, Altogether Us. But I think it's a really helpful tool because you can do it anywhere at any time and nobody has to know that you're doing it, but you can immediately get in relationship with the part of you that's taken you over.
I love this. Everybody, we've been talking to Jenna Riemersma, author of Altogether You, Experiencing Personal and Spiritual Transformation with Internal Family Systems Therapy. One of my favorite books last year that I read and used it many, many times with, I have a cohort of people I meet with 3 times a year, many of whom are in recovery. And just this idea of moving beyond a disease model. I mean, I think, again, addictions are so complicated. We can't just say, like sometimes I hear Gabor Mate say, it's all about trauma. I'm going, and what else? Like it's more than, it's so multi-pronged. So, I mean, it seems to me that, though, that thinking about that part of us that was an addiction, inactive addiction, that just this idea that it had good intentions, it meant well. Like I have a really good friend of mine, this guy, Charles Kelly, and he's the lead singer of Lady A. And Charles wrote a book called he has a song called You Took Me As Far As You Could, which is about his drinking career, right? So I'm not outing him here publicly.
Sure.
That's public knowledge. And I love that because there are parts that took us as far as they could.
That's right. That's right. And what's really beautiful? So the work that I typically do is with people who are struggling with compulsive sexual behavior. So looking at porn or affairs, whatever it might be. And when we're working with their system, the part of them that has gotten burdened with compulsive sexual behavior is almost always in its fundamental positive state, underneath the burden that it's carrying, is the part that's designed and desires to connect in healthy intimacy. And so what's beautiful to know is that these firefighters are stuck in jobs they don't like. They know they're hurting, but they don't know what else to do. And underneath the burden that they're carrying is often the very opposite of what they're doing. And that's such a beautiful thing to know when we are working with these parts, the part that's compulsively viewing porn or betraying their partner or spouse, what that part would rather be doing, its fundamental positive quality is to connect in authentic intimacy. And so our desire and our goal is to unburden the part and get rid of the burden. The burden is the problem. and allow the part to return to its inherent positive essence. It's really
Right.
beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. Jenna, we got to get you back on. So much more that we could talk about. And so thanks for being on Typology. And for all of you who are listening, I hope I know today's conversation has been so enriching, and we will continue conversations just like it. Hey, everybody! Also, don't forget it's my book, January 28th. It is available on January the 28th. You could pre-order it now if it's before, but the title is "The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and Everyone in Between." And I just know that if you check it out, you're going to walk away with some things that will really be of benefit to you. And you know how I'm going to close, everybody. May you have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. May you have rest. Until next time.